Hello and welcome to a series that I'd like to call The Professional Insider, a weekly podcast where I talk to people in particular and perhaps peculiar professions, getting a glimpse into their work and into their lives. I'm your host, Helen Tez-Chandler. Today's profession concerns pilots. Amelia Earhart and Chesley Sullenberger are just some of the names that are part of the 117-year-old profession. Although aviation is nothing new in the 21st century, how much do we know about these people that not only fly extremely high, but are also responsible for several hundreds of lives every single day? I spoke to Matthew Giles, a former Flybe officer and current flight instructor at EFG Flying School.
So, Matt, tell me a bit about your background and how you got into your flying career, really.
So, I started my aviation career back in 2013. At the time, I was working as a manager for Tesco's, so it was really focused on my career at the time, progressing through Tesco's, and I was fortunate enough to get given a flying experience for Christmas. I didn't actually do that initially. I sort of let that sort of, it was in my drawer. It wasn't really doing anything. And then a few months later after that, I decided, okay, I've got this voucher, I can go flying. And I remember that day for like it was yesterday, and went on a little 30-minute flying lesson just in a local town in Kent, and I loved it. Ever since that moment, I've been focusing on pursuing my career in aviation. And then from that day, I was really focusing on doing my initial license, which was called a private pilot's license. So that enables you to fly small aeroplanes, single engine aircraft. And then from there, I wanted to pursue an aviation, more of an airline career. So then I looked at doing my commercial pilot's license. So that that enables you to get an airline license and pursue a career as an airline pilot. That was quite challenging. It required you to do a number of exams. You've got to do 14 exams. And then after that, I went to Sweden, where I did more of my flying training to enable me to get up to get my license. All of that took about 5 years, start to finish. So I finished my training in early 2018. When I finished my training, the airline industry and aviation in general was doing very, very well. And there was a lot of job opportunities available at the time. And I was fortunate enough to get an interview with Flybe just about a month after I finished. And I got a starting date 2 months after that. So I started in the summer of 2018. And that took me up till Flybe went into administration in early this year due to the pandemic. But it was a very, very good airline to work with, especially as someone who's just qualified, because the aircraft that they utilise is very, very good, and it really keeps your skills up to scratch as well. And I mean, I was based in Belfast City for the last 2 years, so that really enabled me to fly because we flew all the routes all around the UK. So I pretty much did that. Part of working for Flybe, I was fortunate enough to start recruiting, be a part of the flight pilot recruitment team. So that gave me the experience to do that and work alongside other colleagues to recruit new pilots into Flybe as well.
You mentioned the pandemic. I remember in our initial phone call, you were telling me about perhaps the lack of knowledge around how much the pandemic has really hit the aviation industry. I just wanted to talk to you a bit more about that, if that's okay. What sort of facts or figures do you know about how much the pandemic coronavirus has really hit jobs within the aviation industry?
So I think initially there wasn't really a figure or no one really realised how much it really affected until recently, when there was an article that was published by Sky News. Aviation has been one of the most hit industries across the board. 33,000 job losses in the UK alone. That was just above retail, where they were just at about 32,000. But I mean, that's just not pilots, that's cabin crew, that's ground staff, that's support staff, people in head office. So I mean, aviation is such a broad scale of jobs, not just in the air, but across the world as well. And for example, I've got friends that did fly for Emirates, and there's been quite a few thousand pilot job losses, and they've got a lot of. They're the biggest flyer of the Emirates A380. They've got a number of those aircraft still grounded, and it's really, really affected everyone around the world since the pandemic's really hit.
Do you think it's been highlighted enough, these job losses? I mean, you've said from like your friends, for example, people that you know, as well as that article from Sky News. But do you think that enough people actually realise how much it's been affected?
No.
Why do you think that is?
I think that's because it's a lot of people. Obviously, they go on holiday, and they 9 times out of 10 they fly where they need to go. But I mean, there's been so many other industries and other focus than on the aviation industry. And I think, I can understand their concerns in terms of being close together on an aircraft. They want to limit the spread of coronavirus. But there's just been no real sort of understanding and sort of focus on us, really. And it's just the damage it's done. And I think unless they put more money into investing and putting an aid package out there for other airlines, there's definitely going to be more and more redundancies to come. It's like at the moment with the number of travel restrictions that there is in place, and countries getting added and taken off of the 14-day quarantine that they're putting in place. People are not booking holidays. You get aircraft that are flying around with a limited amount of passengers. There was a BA 777 that was flying across the Atlantic to New York just a few weeks ago with 20 people on board. Wow. When they've got a capacity of quite a few hundred. I mean, that just shows you that airlines are just burning money and just wasting money because people are not flying.
Do you think then, if we sort of go on to talking about the cons almost, the issues within your experiences within private and commercial piloting and so on, do you think that that's the biggest negative within that industry, or do you think there are more things that are really bad and things that you'd want to change, for example?
So what do you mean, from when the pandemic? But I mean, what, just in aviation in general?
I think aviation in general. Obviously, the pandemic is within its own, I guess, recent bubble. But would you lump those experiences with ones that were pre-existing?
No, so I think the cons of aviation in general, there's still there's a lot of different, so from an airline or private aviation, there's a lot of variety of different routes you can go down, and some airlines work differently to others, and that's why there's always been, for the airline that I was working for, Flybe, they were more of a regional airline, so a lot of people would fly for them for more of a work-life balance. You go home every night and you do that. People that would work for more like a long-haul company where they would stay away quite a lot in hotels, and they would spend most of their weeks away from home. That tends to be a lot of cons from people wanting to have more of a work-life balance.
What do you think are then the flip side of that, the pros, the benefits, the things that you would the biggest takeaways almost?
I think if flying's, every day's different. It definitely offers a variety of experiences. I mean, in terms of the training you go through is very, very, it's very tough, and it's a lot to do. But I mean, there's a lot of rewards flying an aircraft, getting to go to different destinations, and every day's different. The weather's always different. You fly with a variety of different people, and I mean, there's definitely a misconception in terms of money. if you work as a regional pilot, you don't really tend to get paid as much as you would do if you're flying long haul. But there's definitely a misconception in terms of you don't get paid as much as people realise you do.
Would you say that's the main misconception then, that the financial side of how much is distributed amongst the different pilots and the different areas?
I think there can be another misconception is that people think that getting into flying can cost you so much money. It does cost you a fair amount of money to learn to be a pilot, but I mean, you can try and reduce the cost as much as you can. Because, like, for example, if you Googled how to be a pilot, there's one or two main schools in the UK that deliver pilot training, but they cost quite a lot of money. And there's people that probably get put off by that initially, saying that they can't afford to do it. I think for my journey in general, I had to pay for all of my flight training. It took me 5 years to do it, and I had to work and pay for my training as I went along. But I did it the cheapest possible way. So instead of paying £120,000, which tends to be a rough average for pilot training, only cost me about 60,000, so about half the cost. And I did it in a way which I could reduce the cost as much as I could. But there's definitely that misconception that it costs you just that money and that's it.
Through your training and obviously people that you've spoken to, your experiences, if you had the opportunity to change one aspect about it, or maybe even a few aspects about it, what would it be? Would it be the training process? Would it be the financial limitations? Would it be what you said earlier about Flybe having aircraft that was actually good? Is there aircrafts out there that aren't, for example?
So financially, that was probably the biggest obstacle for me learning to fly. The process and the training is very it's very tough. It's not impossible. It's very tough, and there's a lot of work that needs to be involved. But if you've got the right mentality and the right ambition, you can definitely achieve that. But the financial burden for me, it was a struggle initially to get the money together to do it, and it took me longer than I'd hoped to actually train to be a pilot. And if I could change it, if I could change the industry, that would be more of making it more financially better to allow people that can't afford it to actually train to be a pilot, because that's definitely one of the things that people struggle with, is to get the money together to do it. But I mean, the flying that I did with Flybe definitely, and the aircraft that they would use is definitely one that is seen throughout the industry as being quite a good aircraft to start on, really keeping your skills quite good as well.
One thing I did want to bring up, Matt, just now, you've reminded me of something that I came up during my research. I saw a lot of people talking about training of pilots and how it's become a lot more, and do tell me your experience with this, or if you haven't had experience with this, that it's very technology driven now, and it's almost as a reliance on technology for these pilots and for automated scenarios almost. Did you experience that, or?
So aviation, if you go back like 10 years or so, maybe a bit longer, 15 years ago, a lot of the training was more emphasis on the technology wasn't there as much back then. But now we've developed, and GPS has come quite a focus now, and aircraft have got a lot more automated nowadays. So when you go through your training, there's definitely an element of it that's focused on not just automation, but I mean technology has definitely been a lot more adaptable now. When you go through your training, you still need to understand the theoretical sides of how aerodynamics work and the real basic principles of flying an aeroplane. But I mean, the industry's adapted, and it's obviously got to a point now where we need to understand the updated technology, and I wouldn't say that's a bad thing. And in the airline industry, most of your time the plane is on autopilot, so you'll be there just to monitor the systems to make sure everything's working okay. You still need to be able to there to fly the aircraft, but I mean, most of the technology now is automation, and that can add in a situation where you get too complacent.
Right.
And there's been a few incidents over the years where complacency has definitely been a factor of incidents happening. But there has been more emphasis, especially on the incident departments in other countries that are trying to, get to the root cause of why that happens, and trying to get rid of it.
On a lighter note, because I realise that the conversations right now have been a bit on the sad and bad side.
Yeah, no worries.
To talk about, I guess, if you could sort of sum up your experiences, what would you say is the most memorable of your experiences? It could be a good memory, it could be a bad memory, but what would you, when I say your piloting experience, your flying experience, what really sticks out to you as a memorable moment?
So working for Flybe, I definitely got to fly a number of routes across the UK that have been, really, really good, and I've really enjoyed it. One in particular, which is a really, really good experience that I thoroughly enjoyed every time, is flying into London City. Flying into London City, it isn't like any other airport. It has other characteristics that really you need to have extra training to fly into there. And I mean, it's quite a short runway, and because you have the built-up areas, you've got the Shard, you've got Canary Wharf.
Must be quite difficult, wouldn't it? Well, from my ideas.
So it's called a steep approach. So most runways that you approach into, you have a standard glide slope, but this one's a bit more steeper. So the views are really, really good. I mean, the experience of going into there and just, it's a really, really good experience, and I would thoroughly enjoy going into there quite a lot. Going in there during the day, during the night, and as well, and getting to see Canary Wharf and the Shard is always a good highlight to my day as well.
Sounds nice. Sounds very picturesque now that you describe it like that.
Taking plenty of pictures going into there.
Good. I wanted to ask you as well about when you were training, especially, and then obviously subsequently gaining a position. Did you face any people, organisations, ideas almost that conflicted against your career? Did you think that maybe people were against you being a pilot, or maybe even a family member or someone close to you, because of environmental consequences, because of your long-standing work at Tesco, because of a fear of flights, for example, and things like that? The fact that it may make people nervous, and people view it as just flying in a tin can essentially in the sky.
Yeah.
So what kind of conflicts did you confront during your career?
Through my training, when you would meet different people and they ask you what you're doing and give you your life story essentially, and a lot of people that I've come across have just assumed a pilot to be this person that needs to be A-level degree at maths, and they need to have all this knowledge, and they need to be this person, this person, this person. It's like it's totally different, because I've met so many different pilots that some are very academic, but you don't need to be this real clever academic person to be a pilot. There's a number of elements, but being a good people person and being someone that is very, very good in like abnormal situations. But in what your question is, so someone in particular thought that I wasn't. So I've gone through school and I did fairly well, but I mean, because I didn't go to university, and they didn't see me doing it or being a pilot, and they would be very anti me doing it, because they didn't think I was clever enough to be a pilot, but they didn't really understand what you needed to do and what's required of you.
Well, how did that make you feel though?
It definitely made me feel a bit like, why do you think I need to be this person when you don't really know what's required of that particular role to be a pilot? But I think once you talk to people and you really get them to understand what's actually required, and a lot of people are shocked, very, very shocked, and because not everyone's a pilot, and it's not the normal job you hear that comes up from all the time, but yeah, you do get some people that are shocked sometimes. If you know them from school and they're like, oh wow, you work in Tesco's and now you're a pilot. It's like, how was that transition? How did that happen? But people have got different people, bin lorry drivers, loads of different people before they became a pilot. But if you're ambitious and you're driven and you really want it, and I mean, flying is something like I've never experienced before. It's a great feeling. The feeling of freedom, the feeling of flight, the feeling of being up in the sky and no one else is there. It's great. It's really, really good.
Those elements that you were just mentioning now of being free, of actually the passion really behind it, are those some of the main skills that you would recommend to someone who is wanting to pursue a career of being a pilot?
I think they are definitely some of the elements that you really need to have, because it does require a lot of work and a lot of training. And yeah, you do need to have an element of some academic background and good hand-to-eye coordination when it comes to flying the airplane as well. But I mean, that's only a small element, and then the other elements coming into you as a person, getting on really, really well with people, being really driven, really ambitious, and really wanting it. Because even speaking to someone for 5 minutes, you can tell whether they really want it or not. And I mean, especially from a recruitment aspect, speaking to someone for 5 minutes in front of you and asking them some basic questions, you can really get an idea of if you really want them part of your team. But I mean, yeah, there's definitely patience, ambition, drive, because aviation is a lot of work, but I mean, you keep hard at it and you achieve it.
During your recruitment sort of section of your career, and actually even the people that that have become pilots, is there a trend, a common demographic almost, of the types of people that do it? Maybe people not necessarily age, although age could be a factor, but also just unexpected backgrounds, as you've mentioned previously?
Absolutely. I'll tell you, the variety is absolutely massive. When I was lucky enough to work in a flying school just before I qualified and worked for Flybe, and you can start learning to fly at 14. And then you get people that come through the door that have just retired or have got to a point in their life where they've got a bit of free time. They might be a bit older, in their 50s, in their 40s. And I mean, everyone's got their own story. Kids that come through that have just started off still in school, and then people that have got careers as teachers, careers as police officers, and you really get to sit down and talk to these people about how they got into the idea of wanting to train to be a pilot. And everyone's got their own story. And I mean, in terms of variety of, for example, there was a friend of mine that started at the same time at Flybe, and he had a career at 14 years of Virgin, working in the head office, and he's just turned 52, I believe.
Oh, okay.
And most careers sort of 55, 60 as being a commercial pilot, and at first he saw that as being I can't do it, I'm too old. But he made it happen. He put all of his effort in, and he really wanted to do it. And even though at first he saw it as being an obstacle, he just sort of made it happen.
Do you think then the actual demographic makeup then of these people that are interested and actually become pilots is fairly diverse? Is there a lot of ethnic minority representation, female representation maybe?
Yeah, that's a good point to bring. So there's always been there's never been enough females, in my opinion, and now it's more highlighted. That I don't know the figure roughly, but I think it's only like 5% of pilots across the board. It might be a bit less that are just females. And speaking to females that have come through that wanted to train, they've always seen it as it's male dominated. I can't do it. I can't achieve it. But I mean, there's definitely been a lot more focus recently to try and entice more women to, you're just as capable as a man to do it. You can do it. And I'll tell you what, I've flown with some really, really good women pilots that are more capable than any man I've flown with when I was based with Flybe. And it's quite a shock to some people. We've had passengers before when they have disembarked the aircraft and they've seen a female come out on the flight deck and they're like, oh wow, great.
Oh really?
Yeah, I've had some people be like that before, and it's like from my view, I'm sure there's still people out there that are still quite sexist, but I'm glad it's sort of turning around a bit and focusing more towards the person, and regardless of whether you're male, female, black, white, Asian, it shouldn't be an obstacle whatsoever.
Right.
And I'm glad that like EasyJet have recently, over the last few years, they've brought out an Amy Johnson initiative, so it enables females to apply to that particular program and really sort of see that as something they want to do.
Do you think that maybe the whole idea of it being a male-dominated industry is maybe wandering into pop culture or film representations of pilots, for example, like flying films that come to mind are Top Gun, Sully, things like that, and they've got strong male leads. Do you think that that's helping, hindering? It's an accurate representation, it's a misrepresentation?
I think probably when the filmmakers put these things together, they from those sort of people, when they think about pilots, or we'll stick 2 male pilots in there, that'll be a good movie, and don't really think about the diversity and actually making it a fair representation of anyone being a pilot, whether it's a male or a female. But I think from like Top Gun, from that sort of film, it's definitely been more of a sort of this is a male dominated environment, but it's good for the recent years when the airlines have been more enticed to recruit more women and that sort of thing. But I don't think it's just that. I think it's just highlighting to any woman, anyone that wants to be a pilot, to really give them the more information, and that's whether you're male or female, it shouldn't matter. If you want to do it, you can do it.
Drones, it's a topic that's been brought up, I guess, in recent years, and I mean, I've had not personal experience, but a couple of years ago, I don't know if you remember, but I think it was Heathrow that was sort of shut down.
Gatwick.
Was it Gatwick?
Shut for probably 2 days, I think it was, if I can't remember rightly, because I was flying. Was it just under 2 years? I might have been flying. I know it was a while ago. But I know the amount of damage that caused to the airport itself. The aircraft having to divert and not being able to operate any flights because someone was operating a drone so close to the final approach.
It was.
But I've had a personal experience. I was actually flying into to Manchester, and Manchester first thing in the morning can be really, really busy. So coming in from Belfast, the first flight of the day, and then air traffic control brings all the aircraft around onto final approach, and we were probably only a few miles to land, and I've just looked over to my right side and I've seen a drone pretty much at the same level, 1,000 feet just to my right, and like if that gets into the engine or hits the window, or that can because the aircraft's obviously going at quite considerable speed going through the air, and it's something like a drone, and it's quite a big drone as well, that can do some considerable damage to the aircraft, and put everyone's lives at risk on board as well.
So what would you want to happen? I mean, would you want drones to be completely inaccessible to public use, or would you rather it be regulated more?
I know since the Gatwick incident, there's definitely been more emphasis on regulating it and putting more information and guidance to private users. There is, you can still buy a drone on Amazon and get a drone, but I believe, I don't fly drones, so I'm not too sure, but I believe there's notices that tell the user, you can't operate the drone within a certain distance to an airport up to a certain point. But obviously not everyone reads the notices and they just do what they want to do.
Right.
But there's definitely got to be more regulation and more emphasis on making that happen, because there's not. I don't think there's been a major incident, touch wood, with a drone in an aircraft. But I'm not saying it might happen, especially if that gets into an engine. That it can cause some serious damage and possible engine failure.
Do you think that I guess, with drones being considered, as well as, I guess, more private pilots that are flying smaller aircraft, as well as obviously commercial flights, do you think that obviously it's very good for people to explore their passion when it comes to flying, but do you think that it's getting to a point where it's overcrowding the airspace, or do you think it's regulated enough so that it's almost like traffic? It doesn't get too over the top and it doesn't get too heavy with the amount of aircraft that are out there?
So in the UK, talking about commercial aircraft initially, there's a company called NATS, the National Air Traffic Services. So they pretty much regulate all the traffic that comes in and out of the UK from Europe and the Atlantic. And they've put more emphasis recently over the last few years to try and utilise as much airspace as they can. So aircraft coming into Gatwick, they have certain arrival routes that they use, which are not only good in terms of utilising space, but also in terms of minimising noise as well, keeping them as high as they can and bringing them down. And there'll be a holding stacks as you come into Gatwick and into Heathrow, especially being quite busy pre-COVID. But I mean, so there's emphasis on environmental in terms of noise, in terms of aircraft always want to do quite a constant descent to minimise pollution and stuff like that. So there's definitely been more emphasis on commercially trying to utilise everything we've got, because the UK is not massive in terms of someone like the US where they've got a lot more airspace. But I mean, in terms of the small aircraft like general aviation, pretty much all the flying that the small aircraft do are in uncontrolled airspace. So basically, you manage your own airspace in a certain way. So there's a lot of small aircraft around, but it never gets to the point where it's overcrowded, because the airports do manage that in the right way, and they only have a number of aircraft based there at any one time.
Matt, I also wanted to ask you a question about something that I came across in other piece of research that I did, was about, I guess, the impact of climate change within the aviation industry, and how, for example, can it affect the weather conditions that pilots have to deal with these flights? Is it a growing problem? Is it something that you've come across with training, for example, or how is that issue being really addressed?
Yeah, absolutely. Climate change is definitely adapted more over the last few years in terms of the weather that we're getting now. Is sometimes we can get some quite severe, quite intense weather storms that come over. But say all the weather normally we get is generated over the Atlantic with all the frontal systems. So cold and hot air coming together and really moving across with fronts over to the UK. With one particular storm last year, Storm Kira, I don't know if you remember that hit the UK quite hard, with quite strong winds and quite intense weather and stuff like that. That does pose enormous obstacles and danger to aircraft. We have a number of resources available to us on the grounds that we look at Met Office information that gives us a lot of details of what weather is doing and how best to sort of avoid it and that sort of stuff. And also in the air, every aircraft has, well, the commercial aircrafts do anyway, have a weather radar system on the front of their aircraft. So when they're flying through the air, they can put that on a tilting angle to an extent to see what there is inside clouds and precipitation and thunderstorms and stuff like that.
What's the next step for you, I guess? I mean, right now it's obviously quite uncertain with the pandemic and everything, but is instructing where you want to go now? Are you keeping your fingers and toes crossed for the Flybe opportunity to come back, or where are you at really?
So I'm the sort of person who likes to be quite optimistic, but I think to an extent you need to be a bit realistic and look at the damage that the pandemic's done to the aviation industry. So in the airline industry at the moment they're at the point where they're still trying to repair and sort of like pick themselves up from this, and that's still going to be ongoing, I believe, for quite a long time. The corporate, more the private industry, that's people that have got money are really utilising that and chartering out aircraft and maybe even buying their own aircraft if they have the money. So that's quite busy. But I mean, for me now, I'd love to go back into an airline and Flybe in particular, because I really loved working for that company. And but realistically now, I think staying in the small aircraft and instructing, because I've just completed a flight instructor's course. So staying in that and focusing, because that's quite busy at the moment. We have quite a number of students learning to fly, so that'll keep me busy, and just cross my fingers and hope that the aviation industry comes back quicker than forecast.
Mm-hmm. Did you say that a lot of people are taking up classes, did you say?
So yes, we've actually, surprising.
I know, right?
Really surprising given the current time, but there's a lot of, especially the airport where I'm at Biggin Hill at the moment, they've got a lot of inquiries and a lot of bookings, and they seem to be quite booked up even into November, the end of November time. So surprising given the current situation, but I take it people have free time and working from home, maybe a bit of spare money to utilise. So.